Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at 1984, Chapter 2, Part 10, the last part of Chapter 2. And oh my gosh, this was thus far my favorite chapter of the book. Lots of things happen in this chapter, and the whole story just gets flipped over on its head. Crazy chapter. After this, I could not put the book down for the entire chapter 3. And I'm really excited to talk about this. It's a relatively short part. You know, it's not that many pages, but just a lot happening here, and this feels like it got thrown at us from left field, and we did not see this coming. I did not see the events that took place in chapter 2 part 10 coming. Wow. So what's been going on? Well, the previous part, we finished up with Goldstein's book. Winston has been slowly digesting Goldstein's book. He's read a couple chapters. He's back at Sherrington's shop reading it. Julia comes back. He keeps reading it basically until she falls asleep. And that's where part 10 picks up, is Winston waking up. And here's the interesting thing, this line here, and it's going to be kind of important. When he woke, it was with the sensation of having slept for a long time. Now keep that in mind as we go through part 10. Because Winston wakes up to the usual singing that's going on outside. This is that woman that she was been, in previous chapters, she's been hanging clothes, singing. So he wakes up to that. Everything seems normal, right? Clock tells him that it's 12:30. The clock tells him that it's 12:30, but the sun was no longer shining into the yard. So 12:30, so if we're using military time, this would still be in the morning, early afternoon. I don't know the time of year this is, but I don't think there was snow on the ground or anything like that. I'm going to say it's like spring, summertime. And the sun is no longer shining into the yard. I'm trying to see where he says the sun must have gone down behind the house as it was not shining into the yard any longer. The flagstones were wet as though they had just been washed, and he had the feeling that the sky had been washed too. Interesting. Okay, let's continue on. He focuses then on the singing prole, which is a woman, and he starts to admire the singing prole. And she is interesting. He compares and contrasts her to Julia, who's of the party, and he notices like the prole woman is a lot bigger, especially like in the hips, is what he's noting here on page 225. Her thick arms reaching up for the line, mare-like buttocks protruded, and it struck him for the first time that she was beautiful. Body of a woman of 50 blown up to monstrous dimensions by childbearing, then hardened by rough work. And he's comparing and contrasting this to Julia, who's a lot smaller. But Winston is kind of attracted to this woman. And Julia comes in and she's like, well, she's a meter across the hips. And he's like, I don't really care. That's just her style of beauty. And he says, why should the fruit be held inferior to the flower? It's almost as if he's attracted to the fact that this woman can bring a child into the world. And he says here, that was the one thing they could never do. Only by word of mouth from mind to mind could they pass on the secret. Out of their bodies, no child would ever come between him and Julia. So he's kind of attracted to this woman just based on that she can bring life into the world, that she's strong enough, big enough to do that. Whereas Julia's petite. Her waist is super small. And it's kind of all by design by the party. Again, the proles have no restrictions on who they marry, who they have relationships with. Julia and Winston being a part of the party, they're not going to be together unless it's sanctioned by the party. They're not going to have kids unless the party's pushing for it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Winston goes back to this principle that he kind of touched on in Goldstein's book, where hope lies in the proles. Now, why does hope lie in the proles? Well, because the proles are, again, more than 80% of the population. So any sort of revolution, you would need the proles. And remember, in Goldstein's book, he says how the middle class uses the lower class to overthrow the upper class because they have the strength in numbers. But it's going to be so hard because the proles, do they want to do it? Are they too preoccupied with all their freedoms to ever want to have a revolution? Because do they really see that anything is wrong? That's the thing. Winston mentions, again, this is a quote from Goldstein's book, where there is equality, there can be sanity. And how the proles were immortal. Again, more than 80% of the population, they had the vitality, they would stay alive. And again, they have the vitality because, I mean, take a look at that woman. She's big. I'm pretty sure they can kind of eat whatever they want, unlike the inner party members, or not the inner party, the outer party members. They got chocolate rations, they got Victory Gen. They don't have that great of food, it seems like. And Winston, again, notices this thing about singing, how no party members sing. He catches the woman singing, so he's like, okay, the proles sing. Birds sing. The party never sings. The party never expresses itself in any shape or form. They all wear the same thing, right? Nobody's singing because that's like an emotion. You're putting emotion behind it. You're expressing yourself through song. Nobody's doing that. And he recalls that thrush, that bird that was in the field, not the field, but where Julia and Winston first met outside of London, in the boondocks, like out in the forest, the countryside. And the thrush was singing, but the thrush was just singing for himself. It had the freedom to do that. And I guess that's the thing about singing, and that's what maybe that thrush symbolized, was just the freedom of being out there in the countryside without having to really worry as much. And of course, Winston and Julia bonded out there. They talked about whatever. They cursed the party. They had, I think they had food out there and coffee, different kind of coffee, things they could never do in London. So in that way, they were kind of like the thrush. They were just doing things for themselves, to enjoy themselves, just like that thrush was enjoying himself by singing. As we continue forward, this is where everything changes. Everything changes. Him and Winston and Julia are talking. So they're talking about this singing, bird singing and stuff. And this is from the book, 227, but you could share in the future if you kept alive the mind as they kept alive the body and passed on the secret doctrine that 2 + 2 make 4. So they want to pass it on. Stay alive to then pass on this message. Remember, Goldstein or O'Brien tells them it's not a guarantee that you're going to see the end of this revolution. But your offspring might, but the future generations might. So hang in there. It's all for a purpose. And then I quote, this is where shit hits the fan. "We are dead," says Winston. "We are the dead," echoed Julia dutifully. Meaning that they're basically, their future is written for them by taking part in these acts, in taking part of Goldstein's revolution and the Brotherhood. They know their fate, but it's all for a purpose. "You are the dead," said an iron voice behind them, and this is where everything turns upside down. "You are the dead." Who the hell said this? because it surprises Winston and Julia. Nobody else is in this room. All of a sudden, they hear this voice, and it comes behind the picture. And I think what's meant here by the picture is that picture of it's where Julia and Winston met in Victory Square. It's that mansion, I think. You guys remember when he was first in the room above Sherrington's shop? I think that's what the picture is. So behind the picture, the voice all of a sudden starts giving him commands. It tells him not to move. Next thing you know, the picture crashes down, unveiling a telescreen. Holy cow. A telescreen has been behind this picture. The whole time. Sorry, had to take a swig of water. The whole time it was up there. Nobody ever checked for it. Winston never checked for it. Winston never knew. There's been a telescreen up there the whole time. Now think about how many times Julia and Winston met up there. It's been tracking them and listening to them. But now all of a sudden, it chooses to out them. That's kind of interesting. I didn't think about that. Why didn't it do it at the first chance? That's something to consider. Does Sherrington know about it? We're going to get to Sherrington in a second. Because I believe this was all planted. This was all planted from the very beginning. And we just never saw this coming. Next thing you know, the house is being surrounded by police, I guess you'd call them police. SWAT. It really seems like a SWAT operation. People outside, trampling of boots coming up the steps. A ladder breaks through the window. They're coming up on a ladder into the room. So they've got them surrounded pretty much. There's no more singing outside. And I'm wondering really what happened to that woman. Because it says here, the woman's singing had stopped abruptly. There was a long rolling clang, as though the washtub had been flung across the yard, and then a confusion of angry shouts, which ended in a yell of pain. So it seems like they just terminated everybody and anybody who was surrounded around here. Don't really care. They took out that lady in the yard that was singing. I'm guessing. They break into the room. In the course of all this, Winston's paperweight that he bought off Sherrington back in earlier, when was that? Chapter 1? Yeah. No, chapter 2. No, chapter 1. That gets smashed. Interestingly enough, Winston actually notes something about it. The fragment of coral, a tiny crinkle of pink like a sugar rose. How small, thought Winston, how small it always was. And then they hit Julia right in the solar plexus. She's gasping for breath. She's on the ground. They kick Winston in his ankle where he's got the ulcer. He's in pain. They're both in pain. I'm sure tons of thoughts are going through their mind. And Winston mentions something here about the clock. Remember the time that he said it was, I think it was 12:30. Oh, I'm sorry. Old-fashioned clock told him that it was only 20:30. Okay, I'm sorry. 20:30. So I was wrong. Let me go back. Can I go back? What did I say here? I said 12:30. Oh my gosh, I was way off. It's 20:30. 20:30. And then he notices, though, so this is interesting. Which clock tells him this? But a glance at the old-fashioned clock told him that it was 20:30. Now let's see here. Oops. He noticed that the clock on the mantelpiece said 9, meaning 21, but the light seemed too strong. The light would not the light be fading at 21 hours on an August evening? So he's thinking about this to himself. So the sun isn't fading. The sunlight seems way too strong. This is like nighttime, right? And he starts to think, did I oversleep? Is it the next morning? Did they purposefully get him to oversleep by changing the clocks? He goes on to say, but he did not pursue the thought further. It was not interesting, and I get it. He's already surrounded. But I think they set this trap for him and Julia. Next thing you know, Sherrington enters. Because in all this commotion, Winston does mention he wonders where Sherrington is. It's his shop. He barely ever leaves it, right? So he's somewhere, right? He enters the room, and all of a sudden, he looks different. His hair has turned black. He's now wearing the spectacles. He looked bigger. He doesn't look like a elderly, older prole man. Now, he's all business. And the other men become subdued as to waiting for orders from him. So he's obviously some sort of higher up figure. And he's been disguising himself as Sherrington. All this was a ruse from the start. And Winston mentions right here at the very end, it occurred to Winston that for the first time in his life, he was looking with knowledge at a member of the Thought Police. Sherrington this whole time was a member of the Thought Police. And he was spying on Winston. Notice this. He asks somebody, one of the other officers, to pick up that paperweight. Why would he do that? Remember, Sherrington sells the paperweight to Winston. I think that the paperweight was some sort of listening device, spying device. He sold it to Winston for like peanuts. And now he's asking somebody to pick it up as if it's some sort of valuable. Because if it wasn't that valuable to him, he wouldn't have noticed it. They wouldn't have said anything about picking it up. But it's probably of some use as a listening device, and they're going to just reuse it on somebody else. This is where chapter 2 ends. Right there, and was it all a farce? Where's O'Brien in all this? We're going to get to that in chapter 3. Wow. And you can tell here in my discussion question, I just want you guys to think, like, digest this for me. How did this happen? Were they following him from the beginning? What do you make of all this? And some of this, we're going to get some answers to this. Things are going to become more clear in chapter 3. Right? Where's O'Brien? What's going to happen next? Just a bomb has just dropped on us. This is crazy. So guys, for next time, just brainstorm on that. Like, what do you make of chapter 2, part 10? Just a whirlwind of action. And I'm telling you, after this part, I couldn't put it down. I whizzed through the rest of this book, and there's really not much left after. We're on like page 230, and it's like a 300-page book. So chapter 3 is the shortest one. But guys, thank you very much for listening this far. I really appreciate it. Tune in next time. We'll start chapter 3, which is the final chapter of 1984. And guys, thanks again. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.